Hello everybody, my name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today we're going to be talking about Ukraine, Russia, Zelensky, Putin, and of course, the Great Reset. I think the Great Reset is extremely influential in the war that we are seeing in Ukraine, and it's clear that the American media is not telling the truth about what's going on in Ukraine. They have no interest in telling the truth, and they're painting a picture that's really not accurate. It doesn't really hold up. So don't forget to like the video, also subscribe to the channel to kind of support this kind of news. I'm going out of my way to do this reporting. First of all, because I have a fascination with military tactics. Second of all, I see this kind of as a void because not many people are going to report on factually what's happening. On Saturday, I did a news article basically reporting what was going on, what were the facts on the ground, and I did more of a tactical analysis. Now, this is a map of Ukraine for those who are geographically unaware. And you see that there are three main thrusts of the invasion. There's Crimea, which split a little bit, but is mostly focused on going towards this port city of Mariupol. Do not hold me to correct pronunciation. I just cannot be expected to do that. Let's be real. And you see that this is the separatist-controlled areas of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. Again, pronunciation. And those are supposed to be two separate republics as Russia recognizes them. Russia recognizes these two as independent nations. And then we see over here, that Russia has gone north from Belarus. They invaded from Belarus along both sides of the Dnieper River. And they have captured a strategic airport. So that's basically the Russian highlight. They also captured Chernobyl. And it looks like this city's under siege. This city's under siege as well, because this over here is the other main thrust of the attack. Was they assaulted from the northwestern border. This is tank country just because of the plain and the terrain. It's very favorable to tanks. But yeah, not a whole lot has happened in the last few hours, but what is clear is that there's going to be a major push in this area. And another point that needs to be pointed out is that the Russians aren't doing a whole lot of reporting about what is going on in this war, what is going on in their operations, whether they have a success or a failure. They're not really putting it out there, whereas Ukraine is kind of putting out every little success. But however, we did find out from Ukraine that a naval base was captured. So Russia captured a naval base around here, and it's en route to Mariupol. Now, Mariupol has a special amount of significance going back to the 2014 war because, again, Ukraine has been in a state of not peace, so basically war, for the last 8 years. 8 years. So most people don't know about this history. In 2014, there was a coup in Ukraine that ousted its then president, who at the 11th hour went with a Russian bailout as opposed to an EU bailout for Ukraine's faltering economy. So he was ousted in a color revolution. That revolution then led to the emergence of Petro Poroshenko, who was extremely corrupt. And he was then ousted in, I believe, 2019 by its current president, Zelensky. So it's important to note that much of this war happened under the leadership of Poroshenko when Russia annexed Crimea. That happened shortly after the coup in 2014. And yes, it was a coup. It was a color revolution. They didn't exactly have an election to oust him. Not that he wasn't corrupt at all, because I think he had like a private zoo in his house or something like that. It was something insane I remember reading at the time. But anyway, this Mariupol area was one of the goals of the war back then was to capture the city. The separatist controlled regions were never able to expand and capture the city of Mariupol. So that's just important to note. And I think they're going to really try to capture it. Now, elsewhere in Ukraine, it does seem that there's certain sieges uphold. The Russians didn't really make a serious attempt at Kiev so far. They've not made a serious attempt at Kiev. And I think, again, American media is trying to paint a picture that either Russia launched this full-scale invasion, which is false, that was incompetently managed, which is arguable, that resulted in Ukrainians valiantly defending their territory, which I guess is probably true. But what's very clear is that Russia did not launch a full-scale invasion. That's the picture that we're being sold here, is that Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I don't see it. There's no real evidence to suggest that. What looks like happened is that Russia performed a very small scale size, and it was a lot smaller than we give it credit for, because what it looks like happened is Russia deployed a lot of paratroopers, which are light infantry. Like airborne units are light infantry or helicopter units that go onto the ground. So Russia deployed a lot of light infantry, and then armor came in and backed them up. There's probably also some search and destroy type missions going on as well. But this is not our Operation Barbarossa repeated on Ukraine. That is not what's going on here. This is not Operation Barbarossa. To stick with the World War II analogy, you could argue that Russia is doing a very small-scale version of Operation Market Garden, which involved a heavy use of paratroopers and tanks to kind of back that up and reinforce them. But otherwise, it seems very small scale. A couple hundred units here, a couple hundred units there, 1,000 here, 1,000 there. Now, in the last day, we did see that Russia launched an amphibious invasion around here as their troops try to amass towards Mariupol. So there was an amphibious invasion that took place, but otherwise this is not a full-scale war. It is war, but it's not. Russia's not as committed as they could be. So what we could be seeing is Russia is probing the defenses of Ukraine, seeing a weakness, and then rapidly deploying troops to exploit that weakness. Russia has done some probing attacks along the southwestern shore of Ukraine. That's west of Crimea. They've done a little bit of probing attacks, but it seems like Russia is not. Again, they're not really fully committing their forces to certain campaigns in this war. That's just something to note. And it seems like they are expanding in southern Ukraine, and it looks like they will try to unite Crimea by road with the separatist regions. And that is, I think that's a pretty obvious goal. But so far, again, there's not. They're probing a lot of defenses. They're seeing how far they can get into Kiev, and they're capturing certain airports and bases like that. So, again, we're getting a false picture painted of what is going on, and I just want to kind of keep it factual. Now, here we're going to get in a little bit into conspiracy and the idea that there's like U.S. biolabs in Ukraine. And, this is an article by Veterans Today just positing what they kind of show that, these labs exist in Ukraine, and that, Russia does intend to hold people responsible for crimes that they committed. Russia has claimed that genocide has taken place, specifically as it relates to Russian people in eastern Ukraine, and massacres in like the Donetsk region. I'm not sure what proof of that really exists, but as far as like what biolabs in Ukraine, those do exist. I'm hearing, like, I don't see any proof that Putin or the Russian military has targeted these labs, but they do exist. And certainly some of them are in locations that have been in the crosshairs if this map is to be believed. So otherwise, I'm not sure what to make of this story. And then it kind of goes on to show that, experiments gone wrong or outbreaks that are quickly contained. It kind of goes into that. So, again, another news story that isn't getting a whole lot of attention is, again, initially the most successful front of the Russian invasion was from Belarus, and now I would say it's from Crimea, because again, a country's gonna consolidate its defenses near its capital. So this is news from very recent, February 28th. And Belarus had a referendum, and the referendum approved a proposal to renounce the non-nuclear status of the country. So now President Poroshenko can ask Putin to return the nuclear weapon arsenal that Belarus gave to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's pretty interesting news. Again, something to note about Belarus is that Belarus is a nation that rejected the Great Reset. Belarus was one of the only countries in the Western, or I don't know if they'd be counted as the Western world, but Belarus is one of the only countries in the world that did not institute lockdowns. And as far as I know, they don't really have much of a mass vaccination campaign. So Belarus is definitely a country that rejected much of the Great Reset narrative of the last 24 months. And for that, in 2020, there was an attempted color revolution against Alexander Lukashenko, who's their president. He's also kind of a dictator. But again, Belarus was one of the freest countries in Europe in the last 24 months. Sure, they might have rigged elections, but, America don't really have a high horse on that issue. So with that said, because I gotta throw some shade. So this new constitutional language will allow nukes to be put in Belarus, which again would make Belarus much stronger, especially since Belarus borders NATO nations. So now let's talk about Zelensky. Volodymyr Zelensky, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Again, do not hold me to pronunciation of names. I am a little bit George Bush at times when it comes to pronunciation. So, a little background on Volodymyr Zelensky. So, Zelensky was a television personality. He, at the time when he was elected, I kind of compared him to Donald Trump. This guy was a television star who then became president of Ukraine. And obviously, this is very comparable to Donald Trump because Donald Trump also was a television star who became president of the United States. So I kind of saw like a commonality that is probably why those two presidents got along very well. As far as what I could tell, they got along very well, Zelensky and Trump did. So otherwise, that's a lot of where the comparisons stop. Zelensky did replace an extremely corrupt regime in Petro Poroshenko, but it does appear that we're back under new management. And again, this is where Eastern Europe has a very large and sizable George Soros influence, and Ukraine is not only not an exception to that, but probably the epitome of that. So we look at the George Soros in a CNN interview. I created a foundation in Ukraine before it became independent from Russia. The foundation has functioned since then and has played an important role in current events, explains the financier who established the International Renaissance Foundation in Ukraine as part of the Open Society's foundations in April 1990. So the infamous foundation originally placed placed in Ukraine by the New World Order with the aim to assist the transition to democracy to a market economy became a short parallel government, immediately starting with a series of projects in different areas without ever truly helping the country, and ultimately giving the role of president of Ukraine, serving since May 2019 to a comedian clown called Volodymyr Zelensky. And a lot of places are really starting to put that second Y on there. I don't know why. I guess it's a Russian spelling versus Ukraine spelling. And by spelling, I mean transliteration. I'm not sure. Who made his apparent fortune with the Ukrainian political satire comedy series, but was secretly financed by a friend of George Soros. The Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky. His name appeared in the revelations made thanks to the Pandora Papers investigation, which happened in 2016, by the way. The world's largest ever journalistic collaboration involving more than 600 journalists that unmasked the hidden owners of offshore companies, secret bank accounts, and private jets, yachts, mansions, and precious artworks of a bunch of influential people from the New World Order elite. More than 100 billionaires, 29,000 offshore accounts, 30 current and former leaders, and 300 public officials were named in the first leaks in October 2021 that pushed many governments to launch their own inquiries into the financial activities revealed in the papers. So another thing to point out is that Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, was nailed in these papers, and I believe Zelensky is kind of doing more of the same. So what it connects is that Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky is that he 10 years ago, the popular Kvartal 95 started their own shows on the Ukrainian TV channel 1+1, owned by Igor Kolomoisky. Their shows and programs were hits on the channel owned by Kolomoisky. Who later supported Zelensky and the team not only as entertainers, but also as politicians, allegedly under suggestions made by none other than George Soros himself. Today, Kolomoisky is a person of interest in investigation in Ukraine, Britain, and the United States who will probably ignore the results. So the connection is that Kolomoisky owned the channel that Zelensky's TV show was aired on, and allegedly financed the production company of the TV show that made Zelensky famous. And here's the kind of the kicker, and this is what the this article goes on to talk about, is that is what the content of the show was. It's a political satire. As you can see, the Ukraine is governed by a clown financed by George Soros, who made his fortune, it's referring to Zelensky, not Soros, with a TV series called Servant of the People, in which Volodymyr Zelensky stars as Vasil Petrovich Holoborodko, a high school history teacher in his 30s who's unexpectedly elected president of Ukraine after a viral video filmed by one of his students shows him making a profane rant against government corruption in his country. Unfortunately, Zelensky's claim made during his political campaign that he will clear his country like his fictional character in his TV series was propaganda, as Ukraine is becoming a bad joke crafted by Soros and Kvartal 95 Studio, the television entertainment production company operating in Ukraine since 2003, officially owned by Zelensky, but allegedly financed by Soros' buddy Igor Kolomoisky, whose leading figures later joined Zelensky's administration as deputy head of the presidential administration of Ukraine, and one as deputy head of the Ukrainian Secret Service. So, Zelensky, and this is another thing to point out, is that during the election, Poroshenko accused Zelensky of being a puppet of the Ukrainian oligarch that's aforementioned. And he wouldn't be wrong. I believe since 2019, Zelensky, I would say, has tried to distance himself from said oligarch. And Zelensky, since his election, has gone hard on Poroshenko. But again, he's kind of doing a lot of the same. Another thing to note is that Zelensky, if I can pull it up, Zelensky has imprisoned leader of the opposition Viktor V. Medvedchuk, who was the People's Deputy of Ukraine from August 29, 2019. Medvedchuk is the chairman of the pro-Russian organization Ukrainian Choice and an opponent of Ukraine joining the European Union. From an economic perspective, and this is a little commentary, this is from Armstrong Economics, which seems to have pretty good reporting on this issue. It's very analytical. Even join the EU would be to substitute one authoritarian government for another. Even the EU has called upon Zelensky to release Medvedchuk. And this goes on to say that Zelensky is unqualified to be the leader of any state. He has called on the West to impose sanctions against Russia before any invasion. Goes on to quote him. He's totally out of control and relies on claims of Ukraine territory, while his language law reduces anyone who speaks Russian to a virtual non-citizen. Imprisoning the leaders of the opposition and going after the former president to solidify a one-party system is not what the Ukrainian people rose up against in 2014. This article also does not agree with the characterization of 2014 as a coup. I would disagree with that. It totally was a color revolution in the style that the Great Reset people like George Soros often talk about. They talk about color revolutions. That's what happened in Ukraine. And this site clearly believes that the people of the separatist regions, the Donetsk and Luhansk people republics, should have a referendum to decide their own fate, whether they want to remain in Ukraine or separate entirely. I would also characterize this site as not factoring in the significance of NATO being on the border of Russia as a factor in its analysis of the events. That would be a main criticism that I seem to have, because he does seem to act like, again, if these separatist-controlled regions could just have the autonomy to decide for themselves, all would be great. I don't really know if I agree with that. So the last thing I want to do is connect not the last thing I want to do, but now we're going to talk about how Volodymyr Zelensky is tied to the Great Reset. And this is largely from a 2020 speech. So prior to the events of 2020, he gave a speech at the World Economic Forum, which is Great Reset. World Economic Forum is the Great Reset incarnate, and this is what he's had to say. This is translated, but then this is their translation. This is the World Economic Forum putting this out there.
Also, always focus on the state of the modern world and elucidate the challenges facing humanity. And this year forum united the leaders to discuss extremely important topic, the cohesive and sustainable world. Well, to my mind, frankly speaking, Ukraine has what to say in this regard. What is the biggest threat to cohesive and sustainable world today? And this is security issue. Well, security for an individual as well as for many countries and all nations. The present-day world is changing with reactive speed, which transferred us into a new epoch, the epoch of new normality. What yesterday seemed fantastic, today has become a reality.
So I wanted to pause it right here because this guy says new normal a lot. And this speech is dated January 22nd, 2020. And the amount of times he's dropping the phrase new normal is a lot.
But unfortunately, not everything is positive by far in this epoch. Trade wars, the redistribution, division of territories, the hike of military budgets, separatist movements, cancellation by countries of the previous international treaties. This is also, unfortunately, a new normality, and this undermines the credibility and trust of the mankind and make you think, well, are we not going to the abyss? Is this world not going to the abyss? The risk that the forthcoming generation suffering from climate changes, permanent conflicts, poverty, the restricted access to food will upbraid and rebuke every world leader that they really had chance to agree but have never made use of the chance. But the most horrible is that cataclysms have become a routine. Shocks have become habitual for the mankind. And, well, I know for sure what I'm talking about as nobody else, because this is for the 6th year there is war raging in my country. This is the 6th year as Russia annexed a portion of our territories despite thousands of pages of international law and hundreds of organizations that have the task to defend it. This is what we have, a new normality.
A new normal?
Well, the world got united around tackling these issues, but is it enough for Ukrainians, those who got killed and those who lost their houses? Is it enough for them, the concern of the world? That's not enough. And that's true. This is just one of the examples which confirm that the present-day architecture of the world is unfortunately vulnerable, and the existing institutions do not always work as efficiently as the present day demands them to do. The world needs rethinking and renewing the rules, especially the rules of the international security. The world cannot be cohesive only in Facebook. When the address of Greta Thunberg is reposted, the photos of horrible fires in Australia, or, unfortunately, the downed Ukrainian airplane in Iran. Well, does it mean that everyone drew conclusions? No. Why? Because for the majority, in a week time, it will not be pressing anymore, and there is a new, outstanding information news to be reported. There is a good reason why I pay so much attention at the Economic Forum to the security issue, because it is overriding for the development of the Ukrainian economy. At the same time, our philosophy is to remake our own problems into our strengths, the challenges facing us.
So I want to pause it right there, because again, he kind of goes into a long sales pitch about Ukraine and investing in Ukraine. So, Ukraine definitely has a vested interest in trying to become investable by people other than Democrat politicians and their children, because that's kind of a requirement to join NATO, or at least that's probably the biggest thing keeping them out of NATO, other than, I don't want Ukraine. I don't want to be in an alliance with Ukraine. I think a lot of Americans feel the same way. I think a lot of countries in NATO also feel the same way, that they don't want to be dragged into a country that has retaken Crimea as like a war goal and will use NATO to achieve that end. And again, that there's not popular support for Ukraine joining NATO in order for Americans to fight a war to retake Crimea from Russia, even though Crimea has pretty much always been Russia, because Ukraine has never really been a country that's been separated from Russia. We can go back to the Kievan Rus, we can go back to the Soviet Union, we can go back to the Russian Empire and the Tsardom and all that other stuff. So that's just something to point out. Like, Zelensky is clearly Great Reset. That's not to say that Putin is not Great Reset. Putin is outwardly the biggest global leader that stands up against globalism. Him, Bolsonaro, in Brazil is kind of also against the Great Reset. I would also say that the Mexican president is one of the people that seems to be oddly standing up against the Great Reset narrative as well. Again, the Mexican president wasn't big on lockdowns and not big on jabbing either. That's just, again, then Lukashenko is also not very Great Reset friendly, and I think that's why they wanted to overthrow him in 2020. But Putin does give a speech in 2022, I believe. 2022, he does give a speech, a virtual address at World Economic Forum. 2021. It was not 2022. 2021, he gives a speech at the World Economic Forum. It was virtual this time, so we could see the cringe. And again, is Putin completely innocent in the Great Reset things? Not really. I mean, we see him touting mass jabbing. We also see him talk a little bit about climate change in this section. It's a very long speech. It does seem like a speech that kind of contradicted much of the narrative just from skimming through it. But again, he also gave it to the World Economic Forum. I believe this is his first speech since 2009. So I assume he spoke at World Economic Forum before that. And again, World Economic Forum is the Great Reset incarnate. What is really going on here in Ukraine? And I think it could be that this is the attempt of the Great Reset to kind of reshift and re-grab control that they could be losing from the lockdowns that they implemented. So they got a lot of control, they got a lot of capital from the lockdowns that they helped and facilitated, and of course from the code that they helped create, that their agenda helped created. So with that said, this seems like an attempt to reassert control. This definitely seems like Ukraine is going full globalist. Zelensky is quite open about trying to get Ukraine to join the European Union, trying to get Ukraine to join NATO, trying to get Ukraine to be basically a pawn for the globalist elite. And Ukraine is going to be a pawn. They are going to be a vassal of someone. Is that someone going to be the EU and the globalists, or is that someone going to be Russia that has yet to remain determined? Russia and their stated war goals, because again, I trust Russia's stated war goals more than I trust American reporting on Russia's war goals in Ukraine. Russia states that they want to demilitarize Ukraine. They also say they want to denazify Ukraine, because again, Russia is claiming dubiously that there's genocide going on in Ukraine, and and Putin obviously does not believe that Ukraine has a rich history of being its own nation. He believes the fall of the Soviet Union was tragic, even though he does not want to return to the Soviet Union. I think he wants to kind of move on, but move on in a better way. I don't want to use the term build back better, because I'm not sure that Putin is Great Reset, but he does seem to play ball with the Great Reset a little bit more than some of his inclinations seem to give. And then, of course, they do have specific war goals about the recognition of the eastern Ukrainian provinces that have been controlled by separatists. And I believe Russia recognizes these as independent nations, and therefore that's going to be one of the things brought up in the eventual peace talks of this war. Now, Russia is going high alert on nukes and stuff like that. I don't think that a NATO country is going to launch a nuke at Russia anytime soon. Certainly not unless Russia acts first with nuclear warheads. And Belarus is going to eventually become a nuclear nation. So that's also pretty interesting as well. Or at least have nukes stationed in Belarus. And so that's important to note. So I do see this war largely as a proxy for the Great Reset in a sense, because Russia is kind of, even if Putin's not 100% against the Great Reset, and the actions that he's taking largely are combating the Great Reset, because he does not want, because, here's the thing. Everything that they want to do to Russia, they're doing to Ukraine first. It's kind of their version of Canada. Like, everything that the leftist or the elites want to do to the United States, they kind of test in Canada first. And, Trudeau and people like that, Canadian politics, is largely upstream from where America tends to follow. And again, we don't want to follow Canada in politics. And again, Canada, a lot of what the elites want to do to America, they do to Canada first. We see that with the free speech issue. We definitely see that with COVID restrictions and stuff like that. So that Ukraine is Russia's Canada, and I can understand why they do not want Ukraine to join NATO. That it's pretty clear that they don't want Ukraine to join NATO. They don't want the globalist color revolutions that happen in Ukraine to happen in Russia. They have a vested interest in their own security, and I get that. Ukraine obviously has a vested interest in its own security. I also get that. But, they are largely a proxy for global elites. So I have no sympathy for Ukraine. I just don't. So anyway, that's really all I got to say on this issue for now. Bit of a heavier video. Again, so definitely keep in mind, and just always, do your own research. I don't necessarily think, again, Ukraine is not the good guy in this situation by any stretch of the imagination. And Zelensky could have easily chosen a peaceful way out, and he has deliberately not chosen a peaceful way out. And I saw an article on the Dispatch, which is David French's website, touting him as a Ukrainian George Washington, which is just such an asinine comparison. So anyway, if you liked the video, definitely give that like and hit that subscribe button as well. Otherwise, leave a comment below about what you think about what I think. My name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web, and I will catch you on the next one.